Welcome to the 775 Alive podcast, your rural Nevada headquarters for decoding politics, economics, and general global shenanigans. I'm Crystal Newton, your business strategist, breaking down why Nevada's hustle is stronger than a sagebrush root in a windstorm. Here with my trusty co-host, Scott Gaborski, PhD historian, here to explain the smart lessons of history, even if we are likely to ignore them. Grab your boots for a wild ride through today's most important news.
So welcome to 775 Alive. 2 weeks ago, we did an episode on the census, and all of a sudden the redistricting issue has popped up nationwide.
The two things are tied together. Let me tell you what.
Yep, and it's been unusual. Crystal wants me to talk a little bit about being dragged into a redistricting dispute here in Nevada.
Well, it's happening everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
It is like we've all heard that it's happening in Texas, California. We've heard all the national politics, but it is happening right here. We have clips, we have audio to share. And you testified down there. So, I mean, it's happening everywhere, including here.
Right. And it's fascinating. So let's listen to, because, of course, the Texas issue is coming about. Texas is redistricting. And the argument is they're doing this to create 5 more Republican seats in the House, although there's some lawsuits we can talk about. But let's listen to Texas's justification. And then California Governor Gavin Newsom with his justification for redistricting to protect those, to create 5 more Democratic seats to counterbalance what Texas is trying to do. So here's the 2 clips.
Why now? 2 reasons. One is, since we last did redistricting, there's been a change in law. A court decision affecting Texas came out and said that coalition districts are no longer required, and it's perfectly legal to dismantle coalition districts. The second is gerrymandering can be done, or drawing lines can be done, on the basis of political makeup, as in Republican versus Democrat, and there's nothing illegal about that. And then when you look at the outcome of the most recent presidential election, all these districts that are being added are districts that were won by Trump. Here's the point of that. These voters in these districts won by Trump, they don't have the ability to vote for their candidate of choice now because they're in congressional districts. They're in a Democrat district, as opposed to a district won by Trump. And so we have the authority legally under redistricting law to draw districts that align with the voter preferences of the voters of the state of Texas. And Donald Trump proved in these Hispanic-created districts that Hispanics, as well as other people in those districts, they want to vote Republican.
And we'll be asking for the people on November 4th, a special election, coinciding with a lot of local municipal elections, to provide a temporary pathway for congressional maps. We will affirm our commitment to the state independent redistricting after the 2030 census, but we're asking the voters for their consent to do midterm redistricting in 2026, 2028, and 2030 for the congressional maps to respond to what's happening in Texas, to respond what Trump is trying to excite.
So there you go. You have a series of issues that have been laid out here in these 2 clips. So Texas is not only justifying this because there's some potential lawsuits, but also on the fact that Texas's population has been growing. And that's what's been generating the need here to redistrict and move these districts around. California's counter-argument is that doing this redistricting in the middle of a census cycle, right, is fundamentally wrong. And if Texas can do it fundamentally wrong, California apparently can do it fundamentally wrong as well.
Yeah.
Right. So we've got these issues of, what does redistricting do? What purpose should it really serve? And when is it appropriate, and how should the redistricting be done? So, I mean, these are the types of issues that people think are solved until it actually happens, which is sort of what we saw in Henderson here recently.
I think you're too nice to California in that description. I mean, Texas is redistricting based on actual population growth. California is redistricting because Texas is.
Right.
And it's not fair.
It's not fair. Yeah.
Excuse me.
So, And I got dragged in right after we did the census episode talking about redistricting. I got dragged into the controversy down in Henderson.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that we talk about that because Texas is in the news, California is in the news. We're all aware of the redistricting issue, but it's happening right here in Nevada. And Nevada is actually one of the most vulnerable states to redistricting. So Henderson, what I found interesting is they had to call somebody from Elko, to come down and testify.
Yeah, well, I got hired by one of the parties in the dispute, one of the members of the city council. What's going on is Henderson is unique in Nevada by having a city charter that doesn't use the census data for redistricting.
Now, are we referring to this member as one of the members, or are we going to name this person?
Well, I think just one of the members.
Google it.
I think, this issue got covered heavily in the Nevada press down in the Vegas area, and is now picked up nationally. Governing Magazine just this last week did an article about it. But the charge is that this automatic redistricting that's supposed to be triggered if there's a discrepancy of more than 5% between wards. Since 2013, Henderson has not used census data, which of course we've already talked about. Everybody is supposed to use census data for the redistricting.
Well, and they have redistricted every 2 years.
Yeah, every 2 years.
Past, 10 years?
Well, about 15.
Yeah.
So
they've been growing really fast, so it's justified.
Well, and that's one of the issues that we see with redistricting is it is needed to capture growth. The question is, what data are you using?
Yes.
And the dispute has been that
typically they use the
census, right? The direct count done with the decennial census. But part of what they're doing here is using internal data generated by the city. And so anyway,
internal data, does that mean non-public?
Well, it's partially public. What it is, though, is that some of that data it's a form of estimates. And I'm not saying necessarily that what the city demographer is doing, his estimates are wrong. I don't think they are. I don't think they're accurate or precise enough to be used for redistricting. But there are a combination of residency permits, average family size dynamics, and stuff like electrical in Nevada energy account information. That's that's proprietary information that they don't share out. And again, for something like roads, or if you're going to need a new hospital or a new school in the next 5 or 10 years, that data is accurate enough for that. It's perfectly suited. That's how you want to capture growth. The question where I got called in, and I've worked with Dr. Sandra Cosgrove quite a bit. She's heading up the Fair Maps Nevada team. She's a professor of U.S. history down at College of Southern Nevada, CSN. We've been having and worked on a lot of these census issues. And what they needed was somebody like, how are these numbers the city's given us comparing to the census? And in my view, they're a little off. Their estimates are high. And they're high enough where I'm not sure that this is enough a solid enough basis to justify this automatic redistricting.
And this one council member was the one taking issue. And there actually was a little bit of a blow up, and we'll play that in a little bit. But if you don't mind, I want to read something that she's published.
Okay.
Mayor Michelle Romero, is she the Henderson mayor?
She's the mayor of City Henderson.
Mayor Michelle, and this is her words, not mine. Mayor Michelle Romero is trying to play a political game with Henderson's Ward 3 residents and intends to move them around as if they were her own personal pawns on a chessboard.
Right.
And it is a little salacious quote for them specifically, but in general, that's what's going on in the United States, and that's what she's trying to take issue with.
Right. And this is one of the things that redistricting debates always heat up about. There's always the argument we're moving stuff. What's interesting in this case, I think, with Henderson is the fact that, of course, this is sparked into charges just like we're seeing with Texas and California that's politically motivated. This is a political effort to dilute the voting power of a precinct that a council member that's on the opposite side of policy issues from the mayor. They're all technically nonpartisan. Dilute her voting power, which is exactly what the redistricting is. But what's interesting, I think, in the Henderson case is that it's taking place very much like the Texas and California ones, outside of the decennial census cycle. Like I said, they're claiming they've done this every 2 years. And that's highly unusual. Other cities in Nevada, city of Las Vegas, which has seen similar growth, or North Las Vegas, which has seen similar growth, they're not doing this. They're depending on the census data. Right.
Yeah. And I remember when you went down there and I got a text from you. You're like, this thing is devolved into kind of an issue. And I was like, what happened? So I looked it up, and I will play it for you here in a second. But you were a little bit shocked as, a consultant and someone just speaking on a matter to have to deal with it just goes to show how contentious this issue is.
Right. And it sort of got overshadowed. I do think there's something interesting in some of the arguments that are laid out on these issues of, if redistricting is an automatic process, what is the input of politicians in it?
Yeah.
Can they be used to manipulate elections and a whole range of other issues? My testimony actually came earlier, so I wasn't like the target. I just got overshadowed in the dispute that sort of came there. But why don't we go ahead and play that and let people hear what happened at the Henderson City Council?
So this is
it's their direct YouTube.
Our council member that's objecting to this process,
right,
trying to speak and getting shut down.
Yeah, right.
And I think it's important for Nevadans to know, because a little bit later we're going to talk about how Nevada in general is in jeopardy. But there's a real fight going on in this room to showcase it.
The proposed redistricting, you've answered this, but I want to emphasize, does it not in fact ensure a more equal representation of the residents by making sure that one area of the city is not overly represented by one council person, so that there is a close to even resident to council person ratio?
Yeah, it should, in theory, this should allow for a more likely scenario where each resident has the same access to their council person. You wouldn't want one council person representing 60,000 residents and another 100,000. You'd rather they both represent 80.
Thank you. This council is obligated to follow the law, which is exactly what's happening here tonight. We are not in an election year, in a year in which an election is being held. And the only person attempting to mislead the residents of Henderson politicized this routine procedure for the second time and suggested the law not be followed and that there be unequal representation of our residents is the councilwoman making these accusations. And with that, I will turn it over to Ward 1 Representative.
I would really like...
You are out of order and you have to wait.
I'm not out of order.
Yes, you are.
Said we're going in order. Think about 7415 because the numbers are wrong.
You can
period. So 74. My name is Councilwoman Cox.
You can wait for your turn.
7415. Why is it being added in as a fourth precinct when I'm already in 7415?
Councilwoman.
I am in 7415. I live in 7415.
Councilwoman.
If you don't stop going out of order, I'm going to call a recess.
But I've had a lot of accusations made about me and my good name.
You're going to get an opportunity to do that.
And we're not going to go through this process when the mayor has done what she just did.
I will
not acceptable. This is your leadership. We are going in order. How you lead. No, I have questions.
Yes, they are.
We're going in order.
And
then
you
will have your chance to ask
questions.
You're not in charge.
You are not in charge.
I will call a recess and we will do this in order.
Oh, yeah.
And allow everybody the opportunity to speak. And we will come back in 1 minute. Everyone will have an opportunity to speak, and everyone will do it in the order of their ward.
Okay, so they shut it down?
They shut it down. Yeah, and if you had been there, like we were sitting out in the audience, they continued the argument, sort of in the wardroom backstage. And what I think that's interesting, and again, at this point, this obviously had devolved into something where my certain expertise was just not exactly valid.
And I just love the idea that a rural showed up and was shocked at the shenanigans.
Well,
you're like, come on.
And as heated as our councils get up here, I don't ever recall experiencing something like that. But anyway, that being said, I think there's some interesting points. So the question is, how do you manage growth with this redistricting?
Yeah.
And the truth is, we might be in a stage where Americans are moving much more quickly and much more frequently than the 10-year census can capture.
Yeah.
Right. Now, the problem with that is, can you make those types of justifications? And again, I'd have to look at a lot of their detailed history data for specific precincts to really tell that. And that really hasn't been shared.
Yeah.
I'm not one. Henderson's about 320,000 people right now. I can't see them getting one ward that has 100,000 and another with 60. I just don't see that happening. They have had a couple large housing complexes, stages come online. But that being said, I think it's interesting that, you get the sense that redistricting is necessary to manage growth. The question is, where are the numbers coming from, right? What does that redistricting do in terms of affecting political candidate choice? Part of what you heard, Councilwoman Cox, arguing about this 7415. That's the precinct she actually lives in. And on the documents presented, that was listed as one of the precincts to be moved, which would have moved her out of the ward she represents. Come to find out, that was a typo, which is another problem with this. With the data, they actually meant another precinct, and the 7415 got put in by mistake. But it's an example of how contentious and heated these debates can really become, even at the local level.
And, we still are a very young country.
Right.
And this might be a little bit of growth pains combined with people taking advantage of the situation. I think, 200 years ago, the idea that they'd move every few years was almost, it was unheard of. And people kind of settled into one spot. So, redrawing districts every 10 years, I think made sense for a long time. But now we're in this place where a city can grow enormously, 10, 15, 20% in a couple of years, which does warrant redistricting. It's just being taken advantage of. So we definitely have to come up with some kind of solution going forward for redistricting.
Right. And again, going back to the estimates, which is really my interest in a lot of this, again, for certain policy purposes, those estimates are perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with them. If you're deciding to build a road, for instance, if you're off 5,000 or 6,000, car trips a day and building a road that's going to take you 5 years to complete, it probably just doesn't matter. Worst case, you end up with a little larger road and a little less traffic, right? Yeah. Which most people would consider a win. The problem comes into
maybe education.
But even
per capita spending.
Per capita, school district. Well, you talk about per capita. One of the estimates that the city's using is actually a technique. It's widely used, but it's certified by the Nevada state demographer. And what it's used for is to redistribute out the C taxes, the consolidated taxes. So those of you who don't know, in Nevada, most municipalities can't collect their own taxes. They're all contributed up to the state, and the state redistributes. It's based on the formula. And my argument, I didn't get to say this, but my argument against that is they are redistributing the C tax based on these estimates. They're not using those estimates to issue like a tax refund to the individual household. Yeah. I mean, even anybody would say that's insane because you don't have accurate enough data. And the question is it then accurate enough data to use for redistricting? Yeah. And that's the question we're at. And, again, this is very similar to what Texas is going into. Yeah. In that they've had a lot of growth in this redistricting. Huge. And should they be redistricting? You also hear the mayor mention that it's not an election year. Mm-hmm. Now, what she's specifically referencing is the fact that Henderson city charter specifically prevents redistricting in an election year but it's clearly understood that they're doing this year because there's an election next year. Yeah. Right. And, that's the same thing, again, we're seeing in Texas. Yeah. Right.
So I do want to talk about Texas and California because there is some monumental things going on, but the same in Henderson, what we're seeing is a weaponization of redistricting rules, in my opinion. And I think it's very important, particularly before we talk about Texas, let's talk about Nevada. Okay. Or one seat in both sides of our house from becoming a supermajority. Right. So what that means is if Democrats get a supermajority, and I don't have anything personally against Democrats. I personally believe in a balanced legislature is best for both people. Mm-hmm. And I really believe that if Democrats and Republicans are all getting a little bit of what they want, it's what's best for everybody going forward. So I want a balanced legislature. But here's the thing, folks. We have midterms coming up. Mm-hmm. Democrats win one more seat. What they essentially will be able to do is redraw the districts of Nevada. Mm-hmm. And with the way we're laid out, the majority of our population centers are in Clark County and Washoe. You can bet that the majority of every district is going to lie within the city, and the rurals will be attached to it, and they won't ever have enough of the vote to ever make a difference. Right. And there's a lot at stake here. Right. And remember, it was almost a supermajority legislature with a Democratic governor, Steve Sisolak, back in 2021, that created the current maps, which everybody agrees. I mean, like Texas, Nevada has an F from these various groups that are grading their stuff. But, the thing that gets us here in Elko, we're in the same assembly district that got redistricted as Pahrump, 600 miles away. So our assemblyman is covering basically the entire eastern part of Nevada, from the Idaho border down to Death Valley in California. Right. It's just an insane region. And one of the issues I mentioned repeatedly when we talk about this is this concept of community of interest, which should be the basis of redistricting. Yeah. There is no community of interest between Pahrump and Elko outside the fact from a Democratic perspective, they tend to vote too Republican. Well, and this is for our Nevada audience specifically. There is a huge difference between Tonopah and Pahrump, but
Oh,
they're
yeah.
in the same county and in the same category of rural.
Right.
But those two almost work against each other within the county.
Right. And
But to your point, lumping them all together in some weirdly drawn district, it's not the best thing for the state.
yeah, well, and again, this gets back, should community of interest be the interest of a political party? Is that the community we're really talking about? I think that's absurd. Where we've got Bert Gurr as our assemblyman, where we have this ridiculous situation where he's trying to, sort of deal with water issues, for instance, big out in the rurals, in Pahrump, which is part of the Colorado River Basin dynamic, and then in Elko, which is totally disconnected in a totally different water system, and you've got this guy trying to balance these two, which makes no sense, right? How can he adequately represent the interest of either group?
Well, and those two issues are actually distinctly different sticky wickets, because the Colorado River Authority is one big thing you have to deal with, but then Elko is the headwaters for most of the water rights that go through northern Nevada.
Yeah, right. The Humboldt River.
Completely different things. One's intrastate, one's intrastate.
Yeah.
And it's like, how does one assemblyman address both? And water's a very complicated issue. So, I mean, we're always, Elko and Lovelock are.
Oh, yeah.
Lovelock is the end. So Elko's the headwaters, Lovelock's the end. Technically, they have some sort of a right that makes them reach into other counties. But to your point, having one politician cover all those very important issues is kind of absurd.
Right. And before this redistricting that was done in 2021, there was an assembly district in the South, not centered on Pahrump, but included Pahrump, that could really deal with Southern Nye County, Lincoln County, that can deal with this. And then there was one in the North that was sort of centered in Elko. And that actually, in my mind, is a much more, I don't want to use the term natural, but it's a much more logical community of interest than the idea, well, you're all rural, so, your issues are all the same. That's just absurd, right? Not to mention the gerrymandering that went on. One of the things that also happened in that redistricting, which was done, they held a special session, again, like Texas. There was a special session of the Nevada legislature. It was called over Veterans Day weekend. So, it's a holiday weekend.
And
People
it certainly was a special session.
It was certainly a special session where they ran through these maps. But one of the things they did is there was interest in taking the Duck Valley Reservation in extreme northwest Elko County up on the Idaho border and trying to move it into a district to the west that, combined them with Pyramid Lake and some other native tribes to increase sort of native representation within that district to create a more favorable ground.
Natives that traditionally vote Democrat.
Well, they haven't traditionally voted at all. That's a Native American, and it still is. That precinct has one of the lowest turnout levels in Elko County.
I appreciate you correcting that, because I feel like that is a stereotype most people think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but what they ran into is some of this stuff with like the Miller versus Johnson case from 1995. You can't just take out a race-based district. So what they did is they went to a precinct just south that wasn't largely Native American and split it to justify incorporating that. Mm-hmm. So we have this precinct of basically grand total of like 75 voters, where 30 of them vote in a district represented out of Sparks, and the rest vote in a district represented out of Elko. And it's just like, that's just insane.
Yeah.
That's just a ridiculous use of redistricting power.
Yeah.
And all this was over. There's only about 300 to 400 voters right now, maybe a maximum of 600 eligible voters up on Duck Valley.
Yeah.
So we're talking less than 1,000 people that you separated these people from the county that controls their school district, that controls, it just makes no sense. Yeah. Right. And it wasn't a numbers game. It wasn't like if they don't have this part, they can't get this district to balance out.
Yeah.
Right. This was a direct manipulation.
It is a difficult thing to try to address. And the more I thought about it over the last few weeks, I was like, well, it seems like an independent council would be the best thing to do redistricting. But going into the Texas and California issue going on, obviously, Texas is redrawing its districts. It's trying to get 5 more seats for Republicans. And arguably, that's in response to Democrats redistricting Illinois, redistricting California, redistricting New York, like watching them do this. So arguably it's a response to that. But in response to the Texas redistricting, California suspended its independent commission for redistricting because it decided it needs to go back to drawing these maps itself. So there goes that idea.
Well, no. There's a lot to unpack there, and you're
Yeah.
great at throwing 5 or 6 different things in here. So first of all, I think that's exactly we'll talk about this a little bit more, but I think that's exactly what's going to come out of this Henderson case is a renewed call for an independent districting agency in Nevada.
Yeah.
It's probably going to be a ballot question. But that said, California isn't getting rid of their independent redistricting.
No, they're just suspending it for this voting cycle.
Well, they're trying, but it's going to go to a ballot initiative, and there's a lot of pushback.
But don't you find that a little bit icky?
Well, I do find it icky, and it's been interesting that these independent redistricting commissions, in some cases, Wisconsin, they've been responsible for what some people think are gerrymandering. But in New York, just 2-3 years ago, they have an independent redistricting. They drew a map. The Democrat-dominated New York State legislature basically threw out and instituted overruled their own independent commission.
To my point.
Right. But the New York Supreme Court, which is, shall we say, leans rather far to the left, looked at it and said, no, you can't do that. Right. This is just nonsense. So they had to go back to the independent redistricting.
Well, good. There's some common sense.
Yeah. And I think some of that might come out in California. It's interesting, we have, of course, Gavin Newsom's out there using this probably as a promotional thing for a potential run for president in 2028. But on the other side, you have like Arnold Schwarzenegger lining up the take on Gavin Newsom. Of course, when Schwarzenegger was governor of California, was when the independent districting idea came up as a ballot initiative. So that's going to be an interesting battle when that goes out.
I just want to point out more than one instance of this. So these independent redistricting commissions, they're kind of Gavin Newsom. He said he's not entirely suspending it. He's going to give the voters a choice of maps.
Right.
But it's like 3 choices.
It's 3 choices.
Okay. So you're suspending the independent commission to cover your tail. You're actually going to put it up for a vote. But again, this is a case where this political party, the Democratic political party, are making the choices for the Democrats. And I saw this with the Kamala Harris nomination for candidate. They didn't get a chance to vote on their candidate. They were given a candidate.
Right.
And then they had to vote on it. And there wasn't even a choice. It was just one choice.
In the guise of saving democracy.
Yes, in the guise of saving democracy. And I'm like, these are the most undemocratic things you can do, but they're desperately trying to make it look democratic. But I'm watching this happen. And I mean, I was taken aback when they did it with Kamala Harris and they didn't do the primary like they should have.
All right.
And then I was taken aback when Gavin Newsom was like, we're going to suspend this independent commission and then give the voters a choice, but it's very limited. I'm like, this is not how you do things.
Right, and I think it's going to be an interesting battle to watch.
Putin-esque to me.
Well, I don't know if
That's
I go.
like something
I don't
Putin
want to
would
go
do.
that far. But this has been a problem.
He holds Democratic votes, but somehow he always wins like all of the votes.
Well, he holds plebiscites.
So, I'm just saying that it's one of those things where it's represented as democracy, but it's clearly behind the scenes not.
Right. I mean, you're presenting limited choices.
And yes, I know it's a republic.
Right.
We're using small d democracy.
You see. Well, I think there is something interesting with that because I think there's a much more fundamental problem with Newsom's approach.
Yeah.
And again, community of interest here. The U.S. has experimented with the past with what Newsom's proposing, which is that there's some sort of existential need to protect democracy to balance representation in Congress. So if Texas is adding 5 seats, California should add 5 seats. In the 19th century, this was actually done with the Senate. Of course, under the Constitution, each state has 2 senators. But by the 18 teens, the concern of slaveholding states is that more and more free states were going to come into the Union. That was going to give them not only the population advantage in the House, but the representation in the Senate.
I forgot all about that. You have explained that in the past to me. It's like the North and the South were both trying to gain power over the United States. In
a way, this was really about freedom and slavery, though.
And this was slaves were still counted as like 3/5.
Yeah, that was the representation thing. Counted as 3/5 of a person for representation purposes, but still wasn't enough to give the South the leading edge in the House, and this becomes a claim. So in 1820, Maine wants to break apart from Massachusetts and become a state. Missouri also wants to become a state. The problem is Missouri is leaning towards becoming a free state. Maine, of course, would be a free state because Massachusetts was. So this would have given 4 additional seats. What they end up coming up with is the Compromise of 1820. So Maine comes in as a free state. Missouri comes in as a slave state. Then they set this boundary line around the 38th parallel or so, where the 3650 parallel, but that any state that comes in below that line is going to be slave. Any state above that's free. The point is they're trying to maintain a balance.
Yeah.
And they have to revisit it in 1850 because now the territory the U.S. acquires from the Mexican-American War is threatening to upset this. So they try to rebalance this again in 1850.
Wait, so to be clear, this was Congress met and they were like, we only vote for Maine to be a state if you vote for Missouri to be a state. And Missouri's like, only vote for the.
Yeah.
So that was the compromise.
Yeah.
If you get one free state, we get one slave
state.
Got it.
And this is one of the things, what it does, and this is where Newsom, I think, is on very dangerous grounds. What that effort at balance does is it actually prevents the slavery issue from being solved short of Civil War.
Yeah.
Right? Because everybody recognizes after 1850 that this is just non-workable, mainly because so many states are going to be coming in north of that line. So when Kansas and Nebraska are moving towards statehood in 1856, one of the things that does is Congress has to say, we're going to let them have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to choose. And this actually leads to armed conflict in Kansas, which is the populated bloody Kansas, or bleeding Kansas as it's known of. I mean, there's actual warfare before the Civil War going on in Kansas. So this idea of trying to maintain some mythical balance as a way of saving democracy, boy, that's a very, very dangerous proposition, I think, from Newsom.
It's been tried in more than the United States. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but NATO, what was the counterbalance to NATO? It was
The Warsaw Pact.
The Warsaw Pact. So those two were kind of like that. And we're in this situation with Ukraine. I keep going back to this. Europe and NATO was terrified to fold Ukraine into NATO because the balance would be off and Putin might strike. He was that, and there was kind of that same thing is taking place today, and we see a war going on over it. But you know, you have those balance of powers just constantly hanging with each other, and that was, I feel like that's the one reason Ukraine didn't get folded into NATO was that Warsaw side would. I know they were dissolved, but
right, and I think that's a key point. And I don't think it was so much an effort to maintain some sort of balance of power. It's the fact that Russia feels threatened. Now, rightly or wrongly, that's the argument Russia
to
puts
keep
out.
Putin from using his nuclear weapons on us.
Right,
like, all right, we'll leave Ukraine alone.
But I don't know if it's an exact parallel. But yeah, this effort to maintain some sort of balance when you have shifting population. And again, one of the things that's going on that intrigues me is that part of what Texas is doing, and we probably need to go a little bit into the community of interest issue on Texas, particularly minority-majority districts. But Texas is also is doing something, again, going back to Henderson, that's very, very similar. And that similarity is the fact that Texas is trying to account for this massive amount of growth, which is shifting the population center within Texas, if you buy Texas's numbers, right? And I think they're probably largely right, but Texas's population is shifting away from the Houston and to a lesser extent the Austin area northward to the Dallas-Fort Worth area since COVID, right? And that changes some of the ethnic relationships within Texas. So Texas is using updated information like Henderson's claiming they're doing to represent more, right? Is California, which has lost population since 2020, going to take that into account, or are they going to continue to rely on the 2020 census and then shift districts around?
Yeah, well, Henderson's redistricting is justified via population growth. Texas redistricting is justified via population growth. The one place where it's completely unconstitutional and in my mind unlawful is what California is doing, because basically they're redistricting because Texas is.
Right.
That's something a 3-year-old would say. Like, you got cake, I want cake too. And like, that's not a reason to redistrict.
Right.
That is not.
And Texas is redistricting. And again, it's very. I'm
so mad about this.
Oh yeah. Well, no, you're not alone.
Him for it. I'm like, this is the worst thing you could do to our country.
The Democrats are hailing him because they think what Texas is doing is illegitimate.
Right, but it is justified. And anyone with half a brain can see that. There's population growth. California shrunk. And they're basically saying Texas is going to get 5 seats, so we need 5 seats. That's not a justification.
Well, no, let's back up. Let's back up because there's a couple different things. Normally, growth in redistricting or loss of population equates in gaining or losing seats. Nobody's charging about that. Texas is going to have the same number of seats.
Yeah.
California is going to end up with the same number of seats. So nobody's challenging that. but redistricting for the purpose of redistricting to support a political party,
Yeah.
which is what people think Texas is doing, is
Yes.
in a, not a non-decennial year. So halfway through a decennial census cycle.
Thank you for cleaning up my statement. Because
Yeah.
you're right. A population shrink is just enough of a justification for redistricting too.
Well, it could be,
Yeah.
right, or a discrepancy in population, which is Henderson's argument. There's
Yeah.
now a discrepancy between these two regions, but only Congress can change the number of representatives. So, realistically, California is probably now, compared to 2020, down the one or two. They should probably really have one or two seats less. Redistricting has happened between decennial censuses in the past, but always in relation to lawsuits that claimed that the redistricting done was fine. And Texas is facing that. There's a series of lawsuits ongoing in Texas that argues that the districts they had set up in 2021 are illegitimate and are going to be challenged. But, this is, and what seems to be going on is Texas is using that as the legal justification for doing this redistricting is, we're going to rebalance it.
Well, and I'm fine with lawsuits because that's the way you challenge laws. And, once it's settled in a court, then both parties can look at it and accept it because we are a nation of laws in theory. But yeah, I mean, if you don't think something is going on lawfully, you sue and a judge makes a decision.
Right.
And that's that.
Yeah. Well, and this gets into the question, though, I think, of the basis of those lawsuits and this idea of community of interest, which is really, I mean, the whole problem with redistricting is, what you're supposed to be doing is sort of accounting for that population growth and whatnot, but also you're sort of creating representative districts that can represent a group. The question is, how do you define that? And the term gerrymandering, named after one of the constitutional signers, Elbridge Gerry of Maryland, who interestingly plays a key role in actually curtailing court powers, federal court powers in the Constitutional Convention, which is interesting because
he had that light bulb moment. If I draw the district this way, more people will vote for me. Ooh, and then someone else saw it, and then the game began.
And that's where the term gerrymandering comes from, right? It was from his name. That was 1812. Although the idea is much older, right? I mean, of course, the founding fathers were very familiar with Britain's rotten boroughs and whatnot, where Old Sarum, right? Where there's two voters and they get a member of parliament.
Well, technically, invading another country is redistricting it.
Well, that's it too. Technically, but. The question has always been, what's the community of interest? And this accelerates in 1965 with the Voting Rights Act, where community of interest becomes tied to race or ethnicity. And the argument is that you have to make, because the concern was before, which was true, I mean, this was a real problem, right, is that districts would be redrawn where African Americans would always be a minority and can never get somebody to represent their vote. And that was true throughout the South. But what the Voting Rights Act did is say, well, redistricting has to take place where the community of interest, where minorities have the ability to compete equally. The question is, what does that mean? And for years, the initial thing was, well, that meant drawing minority-majority districts that are, say, 50% plus one African-American or 50% plus one Hispanic, because that's the only way their candidates could win. Right? And what happened is that redistricting, or that model of the minority-majority district, is still what we're operating on, but it has been for almost 40 years increasingly brought under court scrutiny. Right? And I have to admit, Georgia's been a center of this. So if we go two big cases real quick, just to illustrate this. Miller versus Johnson, 1995. So 1990 census indicates Georgia should have or gain a seat in the House. Right. And looking at the demographics and the proportion of African Americans in Georgia, it was determined that the fairest way to do this would be to create another African American minority majority district. But what they did, and I was living there at the time, and this was absurd, they took predominantly African American communities around Savannah, Georgia, which is, of course, down on the coast. Draw a line up the middle of the Savannah River for 200 miles where there's no population, and then take predominantly African American areas in the city of Augusta to create this district. And, basically this gets up to the Supreme Court and this type of racial gerrymandering is just nonsense, right? I mean, what do Augusta and Savannah have in dynamics?
Well, I think we've had this conversation. You and I, at least, are in agreement that people more align with their socioeconomic class than necessarily their race.
I think they do. Yeah.
Seems it would be a better way to kind of just, I don't know, but certainly doing it by race seems wrong.
Well, and then what's interesting is how that race issue, and the Texas one is based on these minority majority districts, right? The lawsuits. But another case, again, out of Georgia, this is Georgia v. Ashcroft. After the 2000 census, the Democratic Party dominated the Georgia Senate. And a lot of that dominance was based on the fact that they pulled in a large share of the African American vote.
Mm-hmm.
But they realized that if they kept creating minority majority districts, eventually the Republicans would be able to capture enough other seats, right? Because so many African Americans were concentrated. So let's say you have 3 districts, 1, 2, 3. The one in the middle is 50% plus 1 African American. The 2 on the sides are 35, 40% African American.
Mm-hmm.
And the Democrats are like, well, over time, 2 versus 1 is a losing strategy. So what they did was redrew the districts where each of the 3 had like 45% African American, thinking they just needed to pick up about 6% of the non-African American vote to win all 3 districts. And then they get sued under John Ashcroft, because this is supposedly a violation of the Voting Rights Act. And the Supreme Court said, no, it's not. That competitive edge doesn't mean that you have to create minority majority districts. You just can't create districts that make it impossible for that minority to be represented.
Yeah.
And the question is then, how do you separate out? Is it race that represents the community of interest? Is it socioeconomic?
Mm-hmm.
Or my argument to solving this is so one, I am in favor of independent redistricting commissions, but I think those commissions need a legal framework to conduct their work. And I think that legal framework has to be keeping lower levels of political divisions as intact as possible.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I think that the race division lines are nonsense. I mean, I like to visualize things when I think about this and think about it in a common sense way. If you had a room of 4 people, 2 black people and 2 white people, and the 2 black people had 1 poor black person and 1 rich black person, 1 poor white person, 1 rich white person, the 2 rich people are going to have a lot more in common, and the 2 poor people are going to have a lot more in common.
Mm-hmm.
And this notion that the poor black person and the rich black person are going to have more in common because they're black. That's just, just does that make sense common sense wise? It's
right.
Like, no, that the 2 rich people have more in common with each other and the 2 poor people do.
Right.
But this idea that just because the 2 are black, they're going to get along more than the white people. I'm like, no.
Well,
that's not really how people divide themselves.
The problem is we probably also don't want to get into the thing of trying to divide up districts based on explicitly on socioeconomic status.
No, but I see we were looking at the voter turnout rates, and it's like across the board, white people turn out to vote more than black people. And I guess the thing I want to get to the bottom of is, if you're going to use redistricting to try to rebalance out race inequities, it's not the districting, it's the disenfranchisement. For some reason, these other groups feel disenfranchised and they're not showing up to vote. So it doesn't matter how much more you draw the line around them. You still have a fundamental problem that they're not coming out to vote, and that's on them.
Well, let's break that down, because that's actually an interesting point. Yeah. So we were looking at some data from the Kaiser Family Foundation.
And just like redistricting won't fix disenfranchisement is what I'm trying to say.
Well, and that's one of the arguments. So we're looking at this data from the Kaiser Family Foundation on the 2024 election, right? And one of the arguments on this equality is that if you have a situation where, say, white voters are turning out at X percent and African American voters are turning out at X minus 2%, that represents a disparity, right? And that's what triggers it. And the assumption is that disparity, or at least on the Democratic side, the assumption is that disparity is coming from structural obstacles that are keeping them to vote, right? That's what's justifying the Voting Rights Act. So looking at it, California, right, whites and blacks in the 2024 election actually vote at almost exactly the same levels, about 60-some%, right? I mean, no problem with California. However gerrymandered they were on political party, the race issue doesn't matter. Georgia and Illinois are interesting because the discrepancy in both, whites vote about 6% higher in Georgia than African Americans. In Illinois, it was 6% higher.
Yeah.
Georgia is under the Voting Rights Act, or was until 2019, under special scrutiny for discriminating against African Americans
I know.
because of that discrepancy,
Mm-hmm.
right? Why doesn't that same charge apply against Illinois, right? It's the same discrepancy in votes. And then we get into places, was it Maine we looked at? That was like 20, almost 30% off
I
difference.
think Idaho was the biggest.
Oh, Idaho was the biggest.
The black vote was something like 23%. The
or-
white vote was like 68.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Now, granted, there are some demographic. I mean, that I'd have to look. But the African American community in Idaho is much smaller. That is not a justification for anything, but it's hard to see. I don't think they're large enough to ever create a district that's minority majority in Idaho. But Illinois, you can, right? And there are districts that are minority majority. So why is that supposed discrepancy in Georgia worthy of federal intervention and a sign of structural change, but in Illinois considered, we've solved the problem and it doesn't really mean anything?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, these are the interesting arguments that is really bubbling to the surface now, I think, with a lot of this redistricting stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're doing your redistricting with discrimination in mind, in some ways, that's a civil rights violation.
Well,
I think
it's the bug and feature argument.
Well, I mean, we have to figure it out because this is one of the tools. Well, we have this bigger thing that we've been talking about where, like with Harvard, they adjusted their admission standards to include more minorities and different ethnicities to try to balance out the inequities that they see exist in our culture. And so you're seeing different iterations of how they're trying to balance out these inequities, but it's corruptive to the law because the law has to be applied equally. So the moment you start discriminating in any kind of way, it becomes a serious problem. Even if it is in favor of one group, it's at disfavor to another, which is the fundamental problem.
Right. Well, and again, it gets into a lot of stuff with what does that community of interest in this case actually mean? I mean, like I said, I'm in favor that I think independent districts that are operating under a mandate to keep lower level units, precincts, cities, counties, and so forth, as whole as possible is the best way forward. It's not going to be perfect. Las Vegas is never going to be in one congressional district. No. Its population is just too large. But also parceling it out, I mean, conceivably, we could have an independent district that parcels Vegas up 4 ways and just attaches the rurals to those 4 things, and then the rurals just lose any representation whatsoever.
That's the biggest thing that I fear in this state.
But I think it's quite possible for a redistricting thing to sort of achieve a more equitable thing by keeping precincts together and cities together as much as possible.
Yeah.
So, maybe Congressional District 1 does take the east side of Las Vegas and Henderson and whatnot.
Yeah.
But, this idea that counties such as Elko should be split between 2 congressional districts makes no sense. Some are going to be split. Lyon, unfortunately, because Lyon has that long structure. Yeah. It's probably going to be divided between 2 congressional districts at some point, or 2 assembly districts or whatever. There's just no way you can do it. But some of the stuff we've seen the last few years. Yeah. Well, I can give you another example.
You're making this way too complicated. If you don't mind, I'm going to throw up the Illinois map.
Right.
And so what you're going to see is Illinois in 1970s. And you're going to see Illinois now. So you can see a side-by-side comparison of how this looks. And you can start to see those nice round concentric contiguous districts. They make sense. And then you see how it's been gerrymandered in the modern days. You see everything going in all sorts of directions. And you can see it starts to lose common sense.
Right.
And you can start to see where the ideology has crept into the lawmaking.
Right. And this is an effort to do it. And remember, where do the Texas Democrats flee to escape redistricting? Illinois, which is a lot of people consider one of the most gerrymandered states in the country.
The irony is
the irony is huge.
It's and I did want to ask you, what did you think about that? The Democrats fleeing. Do you think that was the best strategic move for them?
No, I think this has been, because this is the second or third time this has happened.
It's not really going to stop it from happening.
It's not going to stop it from happening, but the reason it does happening is Texas has a unique constitutional amendment that actually requires a quorum in the Texas State House to be 2/3 of members.
Yeah.
Right. Most legislative bodies have a much, much smaller. And the problem is Democrats hold just enough seats where they can deny that quorum.
Yeah. And they're just like us. They meet every 2 years.
They do meet every 2
They're
years.
non-professional. I think they get
Right.
paid like $7,000 a year.
Year plus per diem when
Yeah.
it's in session.
And they get fined $500 a day for not being there.
Well,
So
and that's something that's
there's something.
that's something that's been introduced since the last time the Democrats have done this to try to keep them from doing it again. The argument being with a non-professional legislature, people have to have other jobs.
Yeah.
Right. And they're but I think there's also an issue.
Was that what you'd like to see from a professional politician? Do you think that is in the wheelhouse of politics? Is this just the theater of politics, or was this egregious for them to abandon their post and not face the music?
Well, I think it is political theater, because I don't think they're necessarily going to ever be able to stop this, because what's going to happen is Abbott's just going to keep calling special sessions until it is a bit of posturing. It does bring up an issue very similar to what we have here. How do you veto stuff that as a minority party you might oppose?
Yeah.
Right. In Nevada right now we're able to do it because we have a Republican governor in Joe Lombardo.
Well, call me crazy, but I think standing up in the legislature and making your protest known and heard is the professional thing to do.
I think so too.
Abandoning your post and not saying anything.
Mm-hmm. And then drawing this into a national issue. I think that's something. And ultimately, it has to be the Texas voters that hold them responsible for this if they do it.
Yeah.
And that's
part of them. They're just like poor losers. Like you're not so the Democratic Party lost big time in 2024. They're powerless now, which is what they're facing.
Yeah.
And so, if you're powerless and you've lost your election, you have to stand and make your voice known. You still have to represent your people. Abandoning your I'm sorry, I've already said it.
No. But this is, this gets into, I think the core thing gets into an issue. They did do it in 2021 over the redistricting last time. And that one was much more problematic in part simply because that was a normal redistricting. Right. This is not a normal redistricting.
Yeah.
So, not necessarily saying that justifies it, but, these are different times than what the law was designed to sort of encompass, if we could say. But I do think one of the things that's going on is we're going to have to get a handle on this.
Yeah.
There's going to have to be an understanding of redistricting. And of course, Kevin Kiley from California and one of the New York reps have introduced a bill that basically would just say no redistricting in between censuses. Yeah. Right. We're gonna, at least for congressional districts, we're not going to do this. It's every 10 years. And then you have the question of having to deal with the growth issue. I'm not sure what that means. I don't think anybody trusts the estimates. I mean, one side's going to put up estimates and somebody's going to always think a problem with it. I think what we're going to do is either have to say, live with it for 10 years and we'll adjust it then, or maybe look at a constitutional amendment that introduces a census every 5 years to try to capture these more rapid population changes.
That's what I was thinking as you were saying it. It was like maybe every 5 years is more appropriate, especially, again, our country was set up at a time where moving wasn't so easy, and now it's pretty easy. And actually, the average person moves homes every 3 to 5 years. So, with that being said, that would be justified to do it every 5 years.
But it does create a huge public expense.
Yeah.
Right. And that's one of the things where we need to have a discussion of how to balance that. Right.
And I think the expense is worth it and this is going to sound a little melodramatic, but I really think the districting issue, we only have a few swing states left, which are really kind of movable. And if the whole game board, if all 50 states get gamed out by the parties, you're pretty much not going to have elections. Right. I mean, you'll have elections, but you really won't have a choice. I mean, you can vote for who you want, but we all know who's going to win. And in that situation, essentially the country has failed.
Right.
So I say this is somewhere it's really important to spend money and make sure that it works, because if this gets gamed out the way that we're talking about all the way, everyone's going to be disenfranchised somewhere. So it is important to spend the money to do that, I think.
Yeah, and it's going to be an issue that's not going to go away, and I think we're going to be dealing with this well through the 2026, and even beyond. So, if you got some comments on this, go ahead and shoot us a line at info@775alive.com. I'm Scott Gaborski.
I'm Crystal Newton.
We'll see you around the 775.